Hello, everyone. Karen here with a Prophecy Watchers update. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am here today with Lee Brainard. He has a couple of really interesting presentations coming up, and I wanted to connect with him beforehand to try to understand a little bit better about what he's going to be speaking about. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lee.
Karen, it's always a pleasure to be interviewed by you or any of the rest of the gang there at Prophecy Watchers. We have a lot to talk about, and I'm excited about this upcoming conference.
Absolutely. So let's kind of start with I want to expand on the first presentation you're going to be giving, but the first one that I'd like to speak on is apostasia, rapture, or apostasy. That a lot of words, really big words there. Would you break that down for us? Tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, well, there is a controversy that's been around for about 130 years, but it's just been in the last decade or so where it's become a really big issue. That's the question of whether the English translation of falling away in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, where we read, except the falling away come first, and the man of sin be revealed. The controversy is on that phrase, falling away. And the controversy is, should this be better translated departure and be understood as a reference to the rapture of the church? So we're going to dive into that in my presentation and look at the translation falling away, the translation apostasia, the translation of departure. And we are going to examine in the context from the English versions and from the original Greek, whether departure or falling away is the best translation, and whether falling away or a physical departure is the best understanding of the passage. So we'll look at a lot of evidence and give people a lot of tools by which they can come to their own conclusions.
So the apostasia, would you break that down for the Bible prophecy newbie? What exactly does that mean?
Well, apostasia is made up of two Greek words, apo and stasis, which stasis means to stand and apo means away from. So apostasia means to stand away from something. There's an implied departure. There is an implied separation. There's an implied heart division. And so when we come to this passage, then we're looking at, is this standing away? Is this the church departing in the rapture? Or is this the church departing from the ways of God? Or is this maybe something different? As Mondo points out, is this Israel in the tribulation departing from God?
So there's lots of different ways that you can look at it. I was kind of thinking it would maybe be the pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib groups that would have these big debates, but like just the whole concept of it, if it's literal, if it's something that's more imagined, or if it's actually just a whole different country involved. Like, so it could be like, it's kind of up for grabs. The more you study, the more you look into it and let your imagination take over, then like it could be a whole host of things that we haven't even considered. Is that taking it too far?
Well, that certainly we're going to approach the subject from that way, because we don't want to go into the subject having a position that we hold so tightly that we won't consider the other ones.
Right.
But when we get in there and we start looking at this whole issue, I think Mondo, for instance, makes an amazingly strong case that this instance of apostasia, or this instance of departure or apostasy, or however you want to translate it, the context has it happening in the tribulation, not prior to the tribulation. And therefore, that in and of itself is going to limit how we're going to interpret it. And then the early church fathers associated this departure or this apostasy or this standing away, associated it intimately with the church. I mean, the church fathers associated it intimately with the Antichrist, just based on the grammar and the context, so that wherever you saw this standing off or standing away or departure, you saw the Antichrist. Wherever you saw the Antichrist, you saw this apostasy or standing away or departure. And so we'll go into this. What's interesting about this debate is a lot of the debates we have in the dispensational camp are with people who are outside the camp. But this debate happens to be an in-house debate, which makes it particularly unique.
Interesting. So for those that are kind of thinking that this is too much of like a quibbling, like this is a non-issue, this is not important, we need to be focusing on the rapture, we need to be focusing on the tribulation, all of that, what would you say to the person that's just like, oh, this is not interesting, this is not important, let's move on to more pressing topics?
Well, I think for some people that may actually be the case. I mean, if the Lord has called them to be focusing mostly on evangelism and discipleship, this might be an issue that it's just not going to excite them that much. But if they're into eschatology and if they're into the right understanding of prophetic passages, this will probably excite them very much. The one thing I would say is that this presentation that I'm giving is really, it's a demonstration of the proper way to approach the interpretation of a passage, because we want to look at all the available information that sheds light on the interpretation. What I'm going to show is that one of the popular interpretations of this verse uses selective evidence. It uses a very tiny pile of selected evidence that makes it look like that position is true. But if you go and look at all the historical evidence, all the testimony from the English Bibles, all the testimony that's pertinent to the Latin translations, all the testimony from the early church fathers, all the testimony from how apostasia is used in Koine Greek, we actually come to we're forced to a different perspective. And so I just want to walk people through that and give them a lesson in how to interpret difficult passages.
That is so important as a person who studies the scripture. There are so many ways to interpret different verses, and you can very easily get off onto a bunny trail that is taking you the wrong direction. And it's so important to have those tools in your toolbox so that you can interpret a passage of scripture in the correct way so that we understand who it was meant for, what was really going on, why it means the things that it means, because they were in a completely different culture, different time frame than we are in today. And so we want to be able to keep that in mind and not kind of take it somewhere that it doesn't belong. So I really appreciate you doing that, because so many Christians are not equipped. They have, their heart is in the right place, but they don't have the knowledge. And you really need the knowledge to be able to really get in there and study the word. So I'm glad you're doing that.
And I'm looking forward to delivering the message.
Awesome. The next message is really quite interesting. You just have Mystery Babylon for the title. You could take that all sorts of directions. So tell me about what you're going to be speaking on with that.
Well, there's a relatively big controversy inside the dispensational camp on whether the concept of Mystery Babylon that we see in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, if Mystery Babylon is a figurative representation that's called Babylon, but it's really a different city, and really a different empire, or is this a literal historical city of Babylon that's the head of an empire? So what I want to do is I'm just going to walk people through some of the strongest arguments that are given by Bible experts for a literal historical Babylon being restored and rebuilt and becoming the capital of the Antichrist empire. Then I want to walk through some arguments why I think there's a better direction to go, and to go with a spiritual conception of Babylon, so that some other city is going to be the capital city of the beast empire, and it's figuratively referred to as Babylon. And by the way, I think the reason it's figuratively referred to as Babylon is because when you do that, it puts a lot of breadth and depth in the spiritual understanding behind what is really going on. Because as soon as you call the capital city of the beast empire Babylon, your mind is going to go back to Babel and Nimrod and that rebellion. It's going to go back to Babylon and the great image and that Babylon spirit that went through Persia, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the fractured Roman Empire, and that Babylonian spirit is still here today in all the false ways, including the Roman Catholic Church. in the last days, this Babylonian spirit's going to come back together and bring about one world government. So I think that's what's implied with the concept of labeling a city Babylon, and that's why it calls it a mystery. Then I'm also going to bring out several strong arguments which I think basically inform us that a literal historical Babylon in the last days being rebuilt and becoming the capital of the world, the economic powerhouse of the world, is not very likely. And I'll walk through those arguments too.
Wow. So it sounds like there is so much to unpack. Kind of, would you just briefly kind of give us an overview of what some of those main arguments, the most hotly debated sides of this issue? Would you kind of just, in broad terms, give us a better understanding of what that looks like?
Yeah, well, for instance, sometimes people will say things like every city that's mentioned in the book of Revelation is literal. Well, this is not strictly true. It's, if you mean by literal that it's a literal city and not a figurative city, then yes, it's true. But if you mean that every city in Revelation is mentioned by its literal name and not by a figurative name, then it's not true. And I'll just present some arguments of the use of figurative language in Revelation in particular for names of people and places and things, and then in the Bible in a more general way. But I also want to point out that there are some things that basically, in my mind, make it an impossibility, or at least really near impossibility, for that literal historical city of Babylon to be rebuilt in the last days. I mean, if you stop and think about it,
Yeah.
you would have to dredge out the Euphrates River deep enough for ocean-going ship liners, and then you'd have to put a massive port in there, and then you'd have to put all the infrastructure in there for trucking industry, for railroad industry, for commercial jet delivery infrastructure. And this would all have to be built up in the last days during the tribulation while the world's being hammered by judgments from heaven. To me, it just doesn't seem like a really viable case.
Yeah. Yeah.
One other thing I would point out, and I'll bring out the information for this in my presentation, Babylon, the city of Babylon, was never historically a part of the Roman Empire, and it was never annexed as part of the Roman Empire, and it was never colonized and brought into the fractured Roman Empire. So there's some strong difficulties that understanding is facing.
Interesting. So what made you take that step back to kind of look at it from that perspective? What led you to do that study?
Well, I've never believed the literal historical Babylon being rebuilt theory. Ever since I was a babe in the Lord, I came across Dave Hunt's material, and he went in the direction of that you had religious Rome in Revelation 17, and then in Revelation 18 you had the commercial and political capital of the beast empire in chapter 18. And I've just been on that path ever since. But a few years back, I came to realize that there's some pretty heavy hitters in the dispensational camp, real men of God, who do a tremendous work for God, who are on the other side of the issue.
Yeah.
And it caused me to go deeper into my research and study just to make sure that I was on solid ground. And the more I read from the people who presented mystical Babylon, and the more I read from people who presented historical, literal Babylon rebuilt, the more convinced I was that Dave Hunt was going in the right general direction. And so that's why I'm going to be presenting this time.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a fascinating topic. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. In the last few minutes that we have, I just want to kind of give you the floor. If there's something that you'd like to expound on, or if there's something that you'd like to speak to. I know there's a lot going on in America. This conference is kind of happening at the perfect time because we're kind of, I feel like we're in a little bit of a transition phase. So politically or just spiritually, if there's something that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'm really thankful that you've given me a few minutes to do this. It's really been on my heart that because of the present election, we've been granted a reprieve. Now, there's a lot of debate and division inside the dispensational camp about where America is going to be in Bible prophecy, and whether in the upcoming administration is, going to be under the thumb of the New World Order, or is going to be independent of the New World Order, or is a New World Order plot, a uh, very subtle way of bringing in the New World Order. It looks like it's smashing the leftist Marxist version of the New World Order, and people are breathing a sigh of relief. So there's a potential for a lot of contention here. I've seen a lot of contention on this already in emails, in phone calls, in social media comments. And I just want to encourage people here. We want to be careful that with our discernment of the direction of America and the direction of Trump's administration, and how we think the last days are going to play out as far as America's involvement, we want to be careful that we don't judge other solid men of God's character on the basis of our discernment of what's going on. So if we think that Trump is actually smashing the New World Order, and he's making it retreat for a little while and giving us a reprieve, there are men of God that don't trust what's going on. They think there's some New World Order hands in the pot. And if you think that this whole thing is just the Hegelian solution to the left and right paradigm, and this is a good centrist position that's going to end up dominating the world, well, don't judge the character of those who might be a year or 2 or 3 years behind your discernment. We don't want to judge other believers' godliness or character on the basis of our discernment.
Yeah, very, very wise words. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like there's so much for every person. We are just all over the spectrum emotionally as a nation right now. And I think it's very wise to keep your words in mind. So thank you so much for your time today. And thank you all for joining us. I do hope that you will tune in to Lee Brainard's presentations via live streaming of the Christmas in Branson Prophecy Conference. You can sign up by going to prophecywatchers.com and scrolling down to the Christmas in Branson streamer, and you can sign up there. You will have lots of time to watch Lee Brainard's presentations and many other really timely presentations. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.